When it comes to training around injuries, I feel like I have the credentials to speak about it. So to give you a brief overview of my injury history without going into too much detail, just through the lower body, thank you BMX by the way, I have broken my ankle, I've broken my leg, I've torn ligaments in both ankles, I've had knee surgery, I no longer have a cartilage in my left knee. I've had to adapt my training over the years. It's not been really straightforward. I've had to adapt accordingly. So what I'm going to do in this video is run you through my legs workout that I did about an hour ago. I'm going to speak about how I steer away from pain, get a sufficient stimulus to the targeted muscles. We're going to cover a fair amount of stuff. So all warmed up after the rehab work, mobility drills, and now we're starting off the session with an abductor and an adductor. So it's not a superset, but whilst I'm on this bit of equipment, I do my abductors and straight into the adductor. The reason I do 2 sets on an abductor and only 1 on an adductor is because the adductors get worked a fair bit on my other movements anyway, like my pressing movements. And the reason I do 2 sets of the abductor, or just do that movement in general, is just to get the glutes firing so that I can go into my pressing movements with my knees tracking how I want them to. And it is super important that the glutes are engaged, firing for that to happen. When it does come to adductor and abductor work, I think the main mistake I try to avoid is just making sure when I do initiate the movement that I don't just extend through the spine. So for example, with an abductor, if I kind of push out and at the same time I kind of just extend here, obviously the erectors are going to do a lot of the work rather than the glutes. And same with the adductor as well. If you're leant back in this more extended position and you adduct inwards, you're going to be able to do a lot more weight. As soon as you keep your ribcage stacked over the pelvis there, it'll be quite humbling in terms of how much load you use. I do actually do 2 sets of calves in this leg session as well towards the start of the session. And to be honest, I don't overthink too much with calf training, primarily just because I don't care all that much, if I'm honest. But I just do 2 sets of like 8 to 12 with my knee in a more extended position. So if I was choosing between, your knee more extended or flexed, then I'd go with extended. But if you do want to optimize things, then it's good to do both. In terms of a rep range, I work with an 8 to 12 rep range. Just because I think, don't get me wrong, this is quite fine details and I don't think you should worry about this too much, but if you do work in a really high rep range where you're going to get a lot of blood in the calves and get your calves really pumped up, go in then into a squat variation or a leg press variation with then limited dorsiflexion because your calves are too pumped. I do think that could potentially reduce the amount of knee flexion you can create and then get less total quad stimulus. Onto the hamstrings. So with a seated leg curl with my setup, you'll notice that I use a seat belt, and that's just to stabilize my hips so I can create more force output. Simple as that. Some people will say it's overcomplicating it. If you look at machines over the years, a lot of them do actually come with seat belts. I personally think if you're serious about getting the most out of your hamstrings, you should be using one. In terms of my positioning with this, you'll notice that my hips are a little bit more flexed, slightly more leant over, so I'm not really kind of flexing over a lot. Keeping my spine relatively neutral. I can speak about how I may be lengthening the hamstrings a little bit more from being in this position and not extending through the spine, so I'm not using my erectors as much. But the main reason I'm doing this rather than kind of the usual kind of way by pushing myself in is just because I ran it that way for a long time and progressed it for a while and then hit a bit of a brick wall. So just like a different variation. I could have ran the lion leg curl, but I don't personally get on with that machine too well. So that's why I'm doing this. A couple of mats as well because I'm quite delicate. The pressure on my quads and my knees. It sounds really delicate, doesn't it? It sounds so soft. Following the leg curls, I've got the leg extension. So, exercise sequence is really important. If you're somebody that has tight hip flexors, I don't think you should be doing a leg extension before other movements, okay? And the reason for that is with tight hip flexors, going into a leg extension, obviously one of the heads of the quads is a hip flexor, the rectus femoris. So if you go into a leg session shortening that muscle at the start, it's going to become more overactive, shorter. So then that's then going to have a negative impact on other movements throughout the session. Whereas if you start with a hamstring curl first, shortening the hamstrings, working the hamstrings, that's going to encourage more extension at the hips. So that will then put your pelvis in a more kind of neutral position, which is then going to allow you to be more efficient in other movements. So for me, doing my mobility work, doing my glute bridges, and then my, working my hamstrings, that's going to encourage, like I say, that more neutral position, my pelvis, encouraging that more hip extension. Then I can go into my leg extension to pre-exhaust my quads, and then I can go into my compound movement. So I'm not even getting much rest time either from going into a quad movement, an isolation where I'm really going to toast my quads, and that's going to then allow me to use less weight on my compound. And somebody that's had previous knee surgery, I don't want to expose myself to loads of load. Oh yeah, a leg extension is one of them. It just comes down to how much discomfort you can tolerate. But exercise setup with a leg extension, you'll see I've got a hustler pad here. All that is for is to further lengthen the quads, get a bit more knee flexion. My knee is in line with the axis of rotation, hips, knees, feet, straight line. And you'll see I'm using straps. Some people use a seat belt to lock the hips in. Me personally, I feel like I can stabilize my hips more by pulling myself in on the handles with straps. And don't get me wrong, I don't use straps if I'm using like less than my body weight, because my forearms are strong enough to keep me locked in. So, but when I'm going above my body weight with a leg extension, obviously the weight's going to be pulling my hips up. So that's when I use these as a tool to get the most out of the movement. I think over-relying on straps for too many things is a reason why people get elbow discomfort, shoulder discomfort, because if you're always over-relying on these, your grip strength is going to be weak, and that can definitely display symptoms further up the chain, like I say, with your elbow and your shoulder. So my advice to anyone with straps is use them when you need to. You're working sets, especially your pulling movements, use them as a tool with a leg extension to create more hip stability, when the weight is kind of pulling you out of the seat. Obviously that's fine, but when you're doing a warm-up set with weights you can handle without straps, I don't see the reason to actually use the straps. Decent set there. I actually do 2 sets on this, and that's just because sometimes I don't feel like I can take this the whole way there completely safely. That's why I do 2 sets rather than like 1 all-out set. So probably 1, maybe 2 in the tank there. This next set a little bit lighter, same control, same execution, and yeah, this one will try and take it that bit closer to actual failure. Training volume is going to be determined by the intensity you can train at. So if you train alone and you're doing more sets because you can't quite take some movements that aren't safe to failure, you probably have to do a little bit more work in terms of the amount of sets. If you're training with a partner and you're quite experienced and you're taking your sets the whole way there, then you probably don't need to do more sets. And I think you've just got to be honest with yourself, regardless of your situation, whether that's you've got a training partner or you've not, or you can't actually train as hard as you'd like to. You've got to be honest and assess that, and that will, like I say, heavily dictate how much work you should do. So if you're new to the gym and you don't have that much experience, I definitely give yourself more opportunities to achieve the sufficient stimulus to get growth. If you're someone that's quite experienced and you can deliver all the intensity and stimulus you need off less sets, then it makes more sense to do that, because you then don't have to do more sets, which will, you know, extend recovery time. I have to be so careful when trying to progress movements, because as soon as I chase numbers with reps, load, it can be very easy to then not focus as much on, you know, the foot pressure, the actual, you know, execution, because I just think it's safer sometimes to go a bit heavier, work in a slightly lower rep range, and you then can focus on making sure every rep is perfect. I can definitely get tempted when working in a high rep range to almost let the form go a little bit sloppy. Not like where it looks bad, but where you lose, like I say, that even foot pressure, and then, you know, you then get that referral kind of, not pain, but discomfort in, you know, the hips, knees, that kind of thing. So that's the leg session wrapped up. Just some final thoughts and some further advice just to conclude things. I'd say that, you know, your warm-up is important, mobility work is too prior to the session, and it's important that you are doing the right things for you as an individual going into that session. So there's no point doing a general kind of 15-20 minute warm-up if that's not going to fix the issues that you have, or not fix the issues, but, you know, prime the right areas that you need to. I'd say the exercise sequence is important, which we touched on. I'd also say pre-exhausting muscle groups is definitely a tool that can be used. I definitely think that going for a more out of less weight protocol is sensible, whether that's adding pauses, slowing the tempo down, just getting your execution as good as it can be before progressing reps and progressing load is definitely sensible. Load management is going to be really important. So it's not just about how much load your muscles can handle, it's also, you know, what your connective tissue can handle too, as well as your nervous system. I'd also say with training volume, obviously we touched on that towards the end of the video, that the harder you train, the more experience you have. You can probably handle less sets, but if training all the way there isn't giving good feedback to your joints, then potentially it could be good, you know, if you've exhausted all the other options we spoke about, then it could be worth maybe training with slightly higher volume and less intensity. I'm not saying that's the go-to. I'd probably say for me personally, if someone's a bit more experienced, then, you know, I would favour, for hypertrophy purposes, I'd look at the other options first before just increasing training volume. That's just my thoughts personally. If you disagree, let me know in the comments. Please drop the video a like, subscribe to the channel, support me, support the channel, and I'll do another video soon. Cheers and see you later.